Welcome back, everybody, on a Monday morning. Overreaction Monday, which seems like a perfect time for our next guest to come on, as Sam Herder joins us from Hero Sports. BetMGM joins us each and every Monday to give us the lowdown on everything FCS. So we just ended our last segment with our best of the weekend, saluting Drake with its win over Eastern. Is it more of a statement of Drake or where Eastern's at, what went down on Saturday night?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to give Drake its flowers for winning that one, but I think naturally, if you take a national to it, everyone's going to look at it from the Eastern Washington side of things rather than the Drake side of things, just because, I mean, Eastern Washington in the 2010s, you could argue was the second best FCS program, like a better program than South Dakota State in the 2010s, better than James Madison in the 2010s, just with how good Eastern Washington was in those 10 years. And now just taking a huge step back. 2022, 23 losing records, didn't make the playoffs. This year started out with a decent win over Monmouth and then just kind of collapsed and lost to Drake. So that's a tough one because that's a blue blood program in the FCS and a team that ran the Big Sky for many years.
Yeah, just kind of, you saw the score and like, wow, I felt good for Drake. I know what they're trying to do. They've scheduled all of the heavyweights over the last couple of years, but you shake your head where things are at with Eastern Washington right now because that's not good for this division.
Yeah, and I mean they're in a tough spot too because they battle. It seems every year there's one or two professors, on campus on the academic side of things that, at one of their meetings or whatever. Like it seems like every year it comes out the headline that the academic side of things at Eastern Washington are pushing for Eastern to drop football or drop to Division II. And then because it's brought up, they have to have a meeting about it. And then every year they say, no, we're good at Division I, but it still creates headlines. And so every year when you see Eastern Washington, faculty pushing for Eastern to drop football or drop to Division II, how do you recruit big time athletes when they see those headlines? So I think that's just I don't think Eastern is going to drop football. I don't think they're dropping to D2. But every year that headline comes out because some people on the academic side are pushing for it. So that puts the athletic staff in a pretty tough spot there.
And also it's used against them by everybody, especially in the Big Sky. Well, wait a minute. You don't even know if they're going to have a football team. Why would you go there? That's just kindling for what people use in the recruiting world against them. That's just a tough deal right now. Speaking of a Big Sky school, I think everyone around here, Sam, was fixated on the game in Grand Forks on Saturday night. Montana's cruising. It's 24-7 at halftime. And, boy, second half, something happened with Bubba Schweigert's team. That was a heck of a rally and a monstrous win for North Dakota Saturday night.
It was. And if you would have told me last week that UND would win this game by 3, I would go, okay, I could see that. I was pretty torn on who I was going to pick in that game. And I ended up going with the Grizz. And, at halftime, you're obviously feeling pretty good about it with the Grizz up 24-7, but then in the second half, UND just really flipped the script, and it wasn't like there was a kick return for a touchdown and then a pick six and UND was back in it. They just bled the clock and UND led or leaned on Montana's defensive line in front seven, and then defensively for the Hawks, I mean, they just got after Ayat, and that wasn't just a second half thing too. Even in the first half, they were getting after Ayat, and then they just kept on wearing on Montana's offense, and a great comeback win. And it's one of those things for UND where now they have to capitalize on it. We saw last year, not to bring up bad memories, but we saw UND was the talk of the FCS last year. Then they kind of fell flat, and so things are setting up for the Hawks to go on a pretty decent run here and keep the momentum going all the way into Fargo for a game that could be between two top 10 teams in a few weeks.
They have Idaho State, San Diego, and Murray State the next 3 weeks, all at home. Those are all, they should win those games easily. So to your point, right, they should be 4-1 when they come here the first week of October.
They should be, yep. And I know there's some history with Idaho State. I can't remember what year it was, but I think UND beat number 6 Weber State in 2017, 2018, and then they lost to Idaho State. I might have those years mixed up. So there is some history there where, hardcore UND fans might be looking at Idaho State and going, we should beat that team, but there's some past trauma with that program. But I think, especially with it being at home, UND should go on a nice winning streak here.
Let's flip the script then on Montana. Montana struggled with Mo State, but won the game. They lost here. Where are we at with the Grizz in your mind?
I still kept them in my top 10. I think right at number 10,
Yep.
actually. But, like I said, like if you would have said that UND would have won this game last week by 3 points, like I would have been fine with that from a Montana perspective. Like I don't think a 3-point loss at UND is a bad loss. It's just how the Grizz lost,
Yep.
where you kind of raise some red flags and go, oh man, like what's going on with Montana. But we also saw them do this last year with an even worse loss.
Yeah.
I mean, their performance at Northern Arizona was a really, really bad performance overall, and then they just built and turned themselves into a national title contender. So still being a little patient with Montana compared to last year, but at the same time they should roll this week against the Pioneer Football League, but then next week they have Western Carolina coming to town. The Catamounts are off to a slower start than I expected, but Western is still a rankable team, and so and then I think they start off the year going to Eastern Washington as far as the Big Sky Conference play. So I mean, the Grizz have to turn things around in a hurry, or else they might suffer another loss. And as we know, home field advantage is so important in the FCS playoffs, and we're already talking about that right now. But to have home field playoff advantage in a top 2 seed, you probably can't have 2 losses to FCS opponents. So now, big picture wise, Montana has to go on a run here.
The thing to me on how they played that game, how coached the end of that game was head scratching. I just didn't understand what they were doing offensively. I know UND started to flip things offensively on them, but I didn't get what Montana's game plan was offensively in the second half.
Yeah, it seems like offensive coaches just get so like antsy and like overthink things.
Yes.
It was maybe one of those things where they were in such a flow in the first half and hit on explosive plays and had a nice run pass balance for Montana. Then in the second half, they just barely had the ball because UND would go on these lengthy drives. And so then when Montana had the ball, it just seemed like they felt like they had to move the chains like quickly, and they were passing a little bit too much, and they weren't giving the ball to Eli Gilman as much as they should have. So I don't know. It was definitely, you could question the play calling there in the second half. I just felt like Montana's offense and offensive play calling, like I said, was getting antsy just because they barely had the ball, and they felt like they had to like change their game plan a little bit just because they had such limited possessions in the second half.
Our crack research team, Sam, it was 2018. UND beat Sam Houston on the road. Then the next week they lost to Idaho State at home. That's okay. And you look last year, they beat the Bison, and the following week they got shut out at Northern Iowa. That's what's happened with Bubba's teams. So this is not nearly the level of team. Like Northern Iowa was a good team last year. I don't know how good Idaho State is. They should. They're at home. UND should win by a couple touchdowns. I'll just say it right now. If it's anywhere closer than that, not great for what's lying in wait. I want to ask you, the Jackrabbits won handily, although I didn't think they played great. What do you get a sense of where South Dakota State is at through 2 weeks?
Yeah, I guess positives and negatives. The negatives is, I mean, the Oklahoma State performance you can kind of take with a grain of salt, I guess, just because OK State is opponent, but it was against UIW. It was a pretty choppy performance.
Yeah.
I'm not one to like blame refs or anything like that, and so I don't think there was like any bad calls, but it felt like there was a lot of flags, and part of that obviously has to do with the teams just playing a little sloppy, but also the refs I think just got into a zone where they anything they saw they threw a flag, and so the game just didn't have much flow to it. And I think that kind of, you saw that with the teams. There was just kind of a sloppy performance by South Dakota State and UIW. I thought the Jacks offensively hit on explosive plays. I mean, Griffin Wilde is the next star player for South Dakota State, the young wide receiver for the Jacks. Defensively, some missed tackles, some explosive plays that South Dakota State gave up. So it was a pretty sloppy performance for South Dakota State overall. But on the positive side, they still beat the number 12 team in the country by 21 points when it was all said and done. Yep. And so I felt, and I think I wrote it too in my top 25 breakdown, I think beating UIW by 21 points is arguably more impressive than Montana State beating New Mexico by 3 points. Like I think UIW is probably a better team than New Mexico. So overall, still an impressive win for South Dakota State, but something you can look at and say, okay, they still have a lot to work on for the Jacks.
There is a new team, at least in my top 5, I believe yours as well, and that's Idaho. Idaho goes, they scare the heck out of Oregon, and then they beat Wyoming with its backup quarterback, who then got hurt in the game as well. I don't know if there's an FCS team that had a harder stretch to have 2 FBS games to start than what Idaho did, and they won one of them. I'm awfully intrigued to see what the Vandals have for the rest of this year. Granted, now, I don't know if they're on their third-string quarterback coming up this week.
Yeah, we don't have an update just yet on Jack Wagner, who filled in for Jack Lane. Lane was heavily hyped coming into this year, and he broke his collarbone, so he'll be out at least a couple of months. And then Jack Wagner, also upper body injury, looked like a shoulder. He was trying to throw on the sideline, and then they just decided he couldn't give it a go. So that would maybe suggest that nothing is broken and maybe just a sprain, or I don't know. We'll have to see. But yeah, Wagner looked pretty good for a redshirt freshman. But if he can't go, now Idaho is on their third string quarterback, and they'll have to lean on their defense even more, which is looking like one of the best defenses in the FCS, especially their front seven. Keyshawn James Newby, the edge defender for the Vandals, he's an NFL talent. Jackson Eck, the son of Jason Eck, obviously. I mean, he's a really good linebacker for them, and they have some challenges coming in the non-conference. They host UAlbany, who I don't think is nearly as good as last year, but probably still going to be ranked this year in this week's poll. And then in a couple of weeks, they host Abilene Christian, who ACU is looking pretty decent. I mean, they took Texas Tech to overtime a couple of weeks ago, so they'll keep on being tested. But I think Idaho right now is showing that they're going to be. We'll see about their offense, but if their defense plays like this, they're going to make some noise nationally.
After an 0-for last week, we had 3 FCS teams win over FBS. I mentioned Idaho, St. Francis. St. Francis won. They beat Kent State, the Red Flash out of the Northeast Conference, and then Southern Utah, former Big Sky member, got a win over UTEP late on Saturday night. That I put Southern Utah on my poll. I know how I feel about FBS wins, but I know you were thinking high of the Thunderbirds. Do they have a chance to do something this year?
Yeah, I had them number 3 in my United Athletic Conference preseason poll, I guess, or preseason rankings. And so that if you're a number 3 in that conference, you're probably right around being, top 30. So they were on my radar. Coach Fitzgerald has, this is now his 3rd or 4th year, but they've had back-to-back winning seasons, which is the first time in a decade for Southern Utah. And they won the Big Sky a couple of times in the 2010. So it's a program with potential. I also have them ranked, just because I think I was already decently high on them, and then that FBS win got them into my top 25. I didn't rank St. Francis, even with their FBS win, because they lost to Dayton the week before. And I mean, the Pioneer Football League, so you had Dayton beat St. Francis. I think San Diego beat Cal Poly. And then we talked about Drake beating Eastern Washington. And St. Thomas almost beats Northern Iowa.
Yes. Yep.
So I don't know. Maybe the Pioneer Football Leagues, maybe they're decent. Probably not, but I don't know. They've had some performances where you go, okay, shout out to the Pioneer Football League.
Maybe we got it. They're deserving more time on this segment, apparently. If Southern Utah beats UC Davis this weekend, then they'll get more of my attention. You beat Davis, then, because I thought they were pretty good going into this season, then the Thunderbirds will have my full attention if they do that on Saturday.
Yeah, that should be a really good game. And I've been pretty high on UC Davis in the preseason and so far this year, but I'm still, I don't know. It's hard to put your finger on, but there's still something lacking for UC Davis. The Cal game a couple of weeks ago, it was competitive, but then that got away from them. They're up pretty big on Texas A&M Commerce this last week, and then Commerce made it an interesting game. So I don't know. I still like UC Davis, but they're just, something's lacking there for me to really believe in them as, a top 10-ish team in the FCS.
New segment that we have with Sam are his highlight games for this upcoming weekend. He gives us 4 to look forward to, so let her rip here. What are the 4 you're looking forward to the most this upcoming weekend?
Yeah, Albany is going to Idaho. That's a rematch of last year's playoff game in the quarterfinals. Interesting that we thought that we were going to see Reese Poffenbarger
Yeah,
versus Giovanni McCoy round two this year, but that's not the case with Poffenbarger. I believe is at Miami, and
Miami.
then
Yeah.
McCoy is at Oregon State and won the starting job there. So still should be a fun matchup. The Kibbie Dome is an electric place, and they're certainly looking forward to their home opener. Mercer goes to Chattanooga. That should be a good SoCon game. I'm high on Chattanooga, even though they're 0-2 right now with two
Yeah.
FBS losses, so hard to gauge that. And Mercer should be really good defensively this year. And then Western Carolina is going to Elon. That's a good CAA versus SoCon
Yep.
non-conference game. Kind of a fair argument of who's better as the third best conference in the FCS. Is it the SoCon? Is it the CAA?
Yeah.
And Western Carolina after this week goes to Montana. And so the Catamounts, who I had in the top 15, they could be 0-4
Yeah.
pretty quickly if they don't turn things around. And then the last one is UIW going to Southern Illinois. UIW, did they give everything they had against South Dakota State and pour everything into that game and look that good, or are they actually that good? And can they go on the road again to a Valley opponent and beat the Salukis? That's one of the more intriguing ones as well.
You got our producer thrilled. Executive producer Stacey Anderson's all over Mercer. I don't know why he's a Mercer Bear fan, but getting Mercer, and they're 2-0. So we'll see. They made the playoffs last year. We'll get see what's happening there. I like that UIW SIU game. That has potential for a lot of points. And you're right. And Albany, Idaho, this time, 5 months ago, thinking we got another rematch, and now it still could be good. I think Idaho should handle them. I'm not on the Albany train here in 2024. Great stuff as always, my man. Thanks again for doing this, and we'll catch you next Monday. Okay.
All right, sounds good. Thank you as always.
Sam Herder, Hero Sports, BetMGM, give us the lowdown on everything going on in FCS football. So we're up to 4 FCS over FBS wins, 2 out of the Big Sky, Montana State and Idaho. Then St. Francis and Southern Utah so far on the FCS over FBS count. We're overdue for a break. We'll take one now and get caught up. Oh, yes, that's a good question. That's a good thing on that, Eric. Our poll question today I threw out there of who had the best weekend. Is it Bryce Lance, who had 2 touchdowns on 106 yards receiving in the Bison victory over Tennessee State? My guy Sam Darnold, who lit up the New York Football Giants in his former stadium, or UND with its monster win over Montana? You can vote now. We already got nearly 200 votes at Hot Mike WDAY. We'll give the poll results on that before we wrap up the show. We'll wrap up hour 1. We come back. Jeff Kolpak waiting in the wings. Lots to chat about on the Bison football team as well as we get into hour 2 on Overreaction Monday. We're back after this.